Hello, welcome to Root Causes, and once again, we're very excited to have a guest. I want to welcome Sam Jakes. Sam, you are an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo, and you have recently put up a blog post and published a graphic that I think got a lot of attention in the PQC community. So we'd love to talk about that today.
Great. Happy to be here.
Sam, thanks for being on the podcast. I have a question for you about this chart. I know that we had Boss Westerbon on this podcast on recently. One of the things we were discussing was whether or not this chart actually shows that ECC is potentially more at risk than anything else.
I would actually disagree a little bit on that takeaway. I put this together originally just to kind of try to make sense of all of the people in the quantum computing space who are kind of really hyping it up, I think. And then the mixture of academics who are just kind of, I've got some particular problem I solve and I have some paper, and try to put it together to say, what would be sort of the first order approximation of where the field is right now. And so, I'm trying to plot kind of a rough sense of what metrics do we need to actually threaten cryptography, and where are we now on those metrics? And I think the two most important ones are qubit count and qubit quality, and so that's what I plot. And of course, that's not the end of the story. So I think this year has been kind of an unfortunate point for this chart because we suddenly moved into a regime where things that I can't plot start to matter. So without adding, a couple extra axes and all of us living in a different number of dimensions, we would need things like the connectivity of the qubits and the range of interaction between them. And that's really what's going to make the difference between whether kind of the farther lines of breaking RSA and elliptic curve cryptography or the much closer points are the more important ones.
Thank you, Sam. That was really useful. I'm going to put your graphic now up onto the screen so that you can speak to it.
Yeah. So the main style of this chart is to kind of say, okay, well, where roughly is quantum computing today? And this is this gray region in the bottom left. And darker points are more recent points. And so there's been sort of progress, but it's kind of chipping away, like it's not rapidly shooting forward. And then we have, over on the right, is where cryptography is threatened. And this includes with error correction. So if I wanted to show you where we would need to be to break cryptography without error correction, the chart would need to be about 4 times taller to kind of get to these, preposterously low error rates. No one really expects that to ever happen. So what people are expecting instead is we do some error correction, and this inflates the qubit counts. We need something like, 1 million physical qubits to break RSA. So that's these red dotted lines. Now the interesting thing here is that these assumptions are based on a code called the surface code. And this is the leading contender of codes. It's the one that has more or less been experimentally demonstrated in the hardware that we expect it to run on. So it's sort of the most mature technology right now, I would say. But the interesting thing is there's been this flurry of research on other kinds of codes. The problem with the surface code is if I want one qubit, so sort of one piece of information in the quantum computer, I need 1,000 what's called physical qubits. So I need to manufacture 1,000 of these little devices to get one of the one that I actually want to compute with. And so this is why, RSA 2048, it's only about 1,000 bits. You might think I only need on the order of 1,000 qubits to attack it, but really you need 1 million because of all this overhead. So people said, well, are there codes with less overhead? And the answer is yes, but it doesn't come for free. So you need extra properties of your physical qubits. So the big one in particular is having these long-range interactions and having kind of more connections between the qubits. So surface code is nice. You can print it out on a grid, and you just have, like a literal XY square grid of qubits talking to their neighbors. But you need something more sophisticated to do these extra codes. And so there's these little X's on the chart that are closer to where we are today, but that's only with these codes that need this extra architecture. So to compare it, Google's dot and IBM's dot on the we are here are just incompatible with these codes. And, some of the farther dots, like the Quero dot or the Quantinuum dot, are maybe compatible, but it's still sort of early days. I couldn't tell you one way or another whether it's actually going to work out with these technologies and these new codes.
Thank you so much for that, Sam. I think that explains a great deal to the audience and to myself. I think that what I'm seeing here now very clearly is that the things that are on the left-hand side of the chart, some of these innovations around quantum surface codes, and some of the things that have come out in articles, the eureka moments, if you will, are what are causing a lot of this movement towards people thinking that 2029 is a better time frame. So the innovations on the left-hand side, bottom left, are the types of things that are causing less number of qubits to be considered necessary for a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, which is exactly the kinds of news items that we've been hearing about recently. Raising the key sizes, especially as you've shown here, RSA 1024, all the way up to the larger key sizes, are not getting you a lot in terms of the number of stable qubits that are necessary in order to break them. It's a very, very fast drop-off, and I think this chart shows this dramatically in a better way than words could. So if we look at all the different innovations, the surface codes, various kinds of ways of error handling, error correction, which is the y-axis, and then what you just told us about how if we can have better communication between the qubits themselves as another category of innovation, this is what gets us closer and closer to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer being a reality, and also everything moving bottom left. I think when it's added all together in terms of the way that you're showing this chart, it really helps me to understand it all in a single picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I can jump back in. Yeah, I mean, the chart is sort of cheating on making it look like RSA is very close because it's a log chart, right? So they're all doubled key lengths and they look right next to each other. But I kind of feel like that's justified because if we have to expect something like Moore's law for quantum computing if we ever want to get there, right? If we don't hit that, then, we're fumbling along adding, a few dozen qubits a year and we just never get to what matters for RSA. Even the early ones we'd never get to, right? Like we need some sort of logarithmic growth. And once we're in that regime, then yeah, the difference between RSA 1024 and RSA, 16384 is, a couple of years at best. Yeah, the interesting thing about these, engineering these new codes, kind of moving them to the left, I see it as more of the theory side, but I think you're right that really I should think about it as like it's the engineering effort of actually building the devices. If the devices are built that run these codes, then that's what moves the curves to the left, because all of a sudden it becomes, that's the thing to pay attention to. But the thing is, we just haven't seen it yet. So these codes are still unproven at this point, and I think we're very, very close to being able to prove them, to see these experimental results. But I mean, maybe, next year's chart might be quite different.
So next year's chart, I understand that may just be a turn of phrase, but do you plan on tracking and updating this chart and publishing updated versions of this chart as time goes on?
Yeah, that is my plan. So I have been doing this since late 2021, doing roughly a update every year. And so it continues to be the most impactful research that I do in some sense. So there's no reason to stop. And I think it'll be fun someday if it actually breaks the quantum computers to be, oh, look, finally, Yeah, I think next year it'll be, I don't expect the chart to look that much different, but I'm kind of thinking that I'll be able to say more definitively, okay, these new dots, yes, we should be concerned about them, or, we still haven't seen this experimental results, maybe there's more to it, more difficulties even than anticipated.
So Sam, in April of this year, not long ago, we had a number of important papers that have been published around this, and I'd love to hear some of your comments about it while we've got you here.
So Google had one thinking still about the surface code, where their estimate was around 500,000 physical qubits for ECC and around 10 minutes of the attack time, because they're still thinking of surface codes. Because that's what their device does now. That's like they're the leader in experimental surface code demonstrations. So this makes sense. They have started, I think, looking into and investing in some of these other technologies. I think they're sort of, have more credence in it than they did before. But there was another paper by Oratomic and out of Caltech that was estimating 10,000 qubits to break RSA. The subtext to that I think should have been in the title was 113 years and 10,000 qubits. So when you parameterize for, an attack that will actually finish in our lifetimes, it gets to be more around 100,000, which is similar to another paper. And that was Iceberg Quantum that kind of did the same thing. And all of these are, again, these fancy new codes. These bicycle codes is one of the variants that they're using. And now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, what was your question?
Yes, the Oratomic paper is the one that I was thinking about very specifically, and I'm happy to be corrected on any of my interpretations on it.
Yeah, so the ECC numbers are a little bit different, but they're kind of hobbled by the fact that Google decided not to publish their circuits. So they had this thing that I don't really see the point of, that they claimed it was, responsible disclosure. They don't want anyone to know these circuits. That I think, you get a team of good quantum engineers and you could probably reproduce this. And of course, we're years out from this anyway. But taking the kind of gross scale of numbers rather than like the details of what is the circuit and this. That was what Oratomic did to estimate the elliptic curve attacks. And that ends up, I think that probably is hiding some details because it ends up being a much lower number than RSA. So that was where they got 26,000 qubits in 90 days to attack elliptic curves. And this isn't that unreasonable compared to their RSA numbers because elliptic curves have sort of always been just a little bit easier for quantum computers to attack in all the estimates. The basic reason is that RSA is easier for classical computers to attack. So we need these enormous primes and enormous moduli to make it hard against classical computers, whereas elliptic curves don't. So you end up with, you're attacking a 256-bit thing versus a 2,000-bit thing. The 2,000-bit thing is going to be harder. So that's where we get to. And yeah, it's a little bit, this is the Oratomic 26,000 qubit number is the closest to where we are today on the chart. And it, looks the spookiest, but it also has the most tenuous assumptions of the physical architecture. So I don't have any good conclusion on this. Just sort of what's going to happen in the next year or two.
Yeah, so that is my final question, Sam. What is going to happen in the next few years?
I think, when I look at the qubit counts of modern devices and the fidelities, I think they're at the point where they could experimentally run these new codes. If, at that kind of high order picture, right? So like the new Helios quantum chip, it's got 98 qubits. The fidelities are very good. They have all-to-all connectivity. It seems like a matter of just, programming in the new code to see, does this work? And IBM wants to build a new chip that has these new connectivities as well. They, their press release is a little bit careful in the wording of have and, will on what exactly they have done with this new chip, but it really seems like they're very close. So I think it'll be an interesting question in the next year. We'll either see these big splashy results that say, hey, look, here's this new code we've demonstrated it, the proof of concept, we just need to build it bigger or something like this. Or there will be a conspicuous silence on these experimental results. And in a year from now, we'll say, well, we've got these big machines. They should be able to run this code. So why aren't they? And that'll be a question of what kind of difficulties maybe did they run into. Maybe maintaining these long-range interactions increases the error rate so much that it makes the code much less appealing. And I mean, the funny thing about all this is, at the same time, presumably Google is behind the scenes working on a bigger chip to run bigger surface codes. And so maybe you end up with a situation where actually these new codes work out. Everything, the new dot is important, but the technology that can run these new codes is already lagging, 3 years behind superconductors. And so maybe it's actually we're no closer than we are to the other lines just because of the differences in the hardware.
That was perfect, Sam. Thank you so much. Tim and I were talking about your graphic for quite a while now on this podcast, and we wanted to basically talk to the man himself. Now we've had that, and we really do hope that you come back. It's an endless topic.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining us, Sam. This has been Root Causes.